200mg 4-ACO DMT trip report, taken from the Vivec Discord. I'd found some 4-ACO DMT online, and I wanted to try it. I asked my neighbour at my university about it, and to my surprise, he had some, and gave it to me. When I weighed the whole thing, it came to a 2.00. For some reason, in my mind, I thought the entire thing was 20mg, rather than 200. I consumed the whole amount, and within 15 to 20 minutes of consuming this, I could already see faces outlined on trees. I just had to remind myself to let the trip happen, as I was well aware the worst thing to do on a trip is to fight the experience, whatever it is. I was walking down this long road with trees on each side between driveways, and from walking, my vision was making me feel seasick. The movement of my head alone was causing me to feel dizzy. I still had no idea I'd consumed so much of this drug and just stopped for a second, and continued on towards this park. When I had gotten to the park, a dog came up to me, so I reached down to stroke it. After stroking it for a few seconds, the communication me and the dog were having was incredibly vivid, and so I stopped and decided to just walk away. As I'm now leaving this park, I passed by some people who were speaking in sim character language. As I listened closely, I realised they were actually speaking English, but as I was so dissociated, to me it sounded like random gibberish. At this point, I was laughing at their silly-sounding language, when I had this thought in my head that they could be talking about something very important and serious to them, and I'm laughing at it. I then realised I couldn't even tell if they had noticed me laughing or if they were talking to me or not. I decided to speed up my walk and just make my way towards this new location I wanted to get to. Walking down the road, I sat at a bus stop as I was becoming extremely exhausted by walking. I sat down and my entire vision for a split second faded into swirling patterns and colours. At this point, I realised I needed to get back home. I was outside alone and my entire vision was just morphed into nothingness. At this point, I believe my ego was already gone, but I truly had no concept to question the intensity of the experience at any point, as before I could even feel myself dying, I had already become fully invested in letting this trip play out and being stuck in it until it ends. Whilst walking back, I was looking in the distance at these very strange brown thick lines that were later out in my vision. I was trying to make out what they were, but everything else was just a normal road of cars and people. Finally, I got back into my tiny university accommodation, which was not a good idea, but I couldn't be outside in this state I was in. The time was about 5 o'clock, and I knew some friends I had would be coming at 6. Funnily enough, my other friend was spending time with his girlfriend, and for some strange reason, I could just not disturb them even when this trip got quickly dangerous. I still had no intention to disturb them, and they were not even a possibility to help me in my mind. This state of delirium I have never experienced before this or since, where logically I'm going round in spirals, and you will see what I mean very soon. This is the part of the trip that I find very difficult to explain in chronological order. Some of these things seem to have happened after something I knew had happened before, and, well, that is the best way I can describe this experience. I'm not sure of the experience before Purgatory. However, I know I experienced a split second of bliss, the most amazing experience possible, before the worst experience possible. But before that, I'm going to try and order the other experiences I had in this time. They did not seem to happen at this time of the trip, however there is no other time in the trip to put them down. One experience was sharing a consciousness with another entity. This entity was almost like a godly thing, however it was not God, it was evil. My sole purpose of existing was an expense to be mocked and laughed at while I suffered. Me and this entity would communicate, however we both shared the same exact thoughts, so how we were communicating is beyond me, but we were. I was showed how my traumatic birth was the reason I was the way I was. I had to relive this birth. At the time of this, I was actually on the phone to a friend who was not anywhere near me back in Essex. I was in university about 3 hours away. He was editing a music video, and as he would go back and forth over a clip, I could hear me doing this on the phone. It would become my mum who was creating me, perfecting me, sitting in her womb, waiting to be born. I felt so impatient and just wanted to be born, but then I realised how beautiful it was to see myself be created, and the comfort of being there. Eventually, I was born, and this was very funny looking back, as I could not even put on my t-shirt. I'm not actually sure when I took it off, but I remember attempting to put it on, and every time I would move the holes around to find the head hole, I managed to also stick my head into the sleeve. I must have ruined this t-shirt. Eventually, I just threw the thing on the floor, feeling so energized and amazed to be alive, and at one point I considered leaving my room to go to the toilet. I remember opening it and putting my hands in the frame to pull my head around the corner, with the insane looking grin on my face, which I then jumped back into my room, laughing at the idea of someone coming around the corridor and seeing my face. Before I knew it, I had then to experience my actual birth. I had to confront it and deal with it. This was scary. I heard the sound of a male voice, which I knew was a doctor, and beeps from a machine. This terrified me. I had to experience the traumatic birth I went through. I don't remember much of it. At some point, I was in purgatory. This was a place where time stood still, but I guess I thought of myself as someone who could somehow best the delusion of the trip. At this point, I had completely forgotten my friends were home. I remember looking at the time, and it was 8:02. I knew it. I knew I watched a 20-minute video. I knew I waited for it to end and then checked the time, that time would have to change. I also set a timer. Now, when the timer went off, I don't know, but I'm sure it went off multiple times, and I just had no idea what it was. I remembered watching the video, and when it ended, I checked the time, and it was 8:22. Needless to say, I was shocked. How could it still be 8 o'clock, I thought? I had no concept of minutes when I was checking the time, but I had the concept of minutes to know if I watched a 20-minute video, that time would have to change. This is the state of delirium I had achieved, and it went on. After doing this over and over for shorter videos, I started to really get worried I was stuck here forever. Suddenly I got visions of taking a knife and sticking it into my stomach, as this was the only way to escape the trip. Something in me knew this was wrong though. This insane pull towards surviving was deeply embedded in my subconscious. I would lay down on my bed, only to become irritable and say, fuck it. I was about to get up and do it. I would thrust myself back down into the bed as hard as possible as I thought in a loop, with my indecisive mind. Somewhere at some point, I thought maybe I should just call an ambulance as this was getting dangerous, when I suddenly remembered that my friend had been home for at least 2 hours. I called them straight away. Luckily for me, they actually knew about shrooms. I've never really discussed psychedelics with them before, and I had no idea how they'd imagine it would be, but they did know what shrooms did, so that was great. One came to my house to escort me back to theirs, while the other stayed on the phone. During this phone call, I had this thought that maybe this entire call was a hallucination, and they haven't actually answered the phone at all. I said into the phone, "X isn't coming, are they?" The voice on the phone, very sinisterly of my other friend's voice, said, "No." Slowly, I let the phone fall from my ear, as I came to terms with the fact I really had to do myself. Then, I heard my name being called from the phone. I instantly pulled it back to my ear to hear their voice asking if I was okay. "Are they coming?" I said again. The person said yes. Soon my friend came through my door, and I gave him a massive hug. I then checked the time, and it was dead on 9. I was extremely happy about this. My friend probably thinking I was insane, but I didn't care. The fact I now had someone I could trust to know I was tripping, that wouldn't call an ambulance or the police, was such a massive relief. I felt so much better. Back at their flat, everything was alive, but to be honest, I didn't care. The TV started talking to me at one point, but in all honesty, I had more important things to be thinking about. Well, that was a rather interesting overdose report. Thank you to the user who submitted this to the Trip Report channel on the Vivec Discord. If you'd like to send a report in, please put it on the Discord because it allows me to collect them all in one space. And yeah, don't expect me to read every report I get because there's so many in my backlog. I'd love to get around to them all. Maybe in the next 10 years I'll be able to tick off the hundreds and hundreds of user submitted reports I get, but yeah, for now I'm just going through it via a pecking order and then cherry picking the ones that are written the best, structured in a way that allows me to read them more eloquently, good grammar, etc. So yeah, if you do want your report to be considered for approval, make sure you take care in structuring it, writing it, and just try and make it as engaging as possible, but don't exaggerate. Say it how it was, because I don't want to share Fake reports, because I already get accused of sharing fake stories on the internet a lot, but well, what can you do? So basically, I've taken 4-ACO DMT before. First time, 30 milligrams in 2018. I was already really trippy as it was. A lot of people were telling me it was going to be like shrooms, but for me and my mate who took it, absolutely nothing like shrooms. It was so unique. One of the most vivid trips in my own mind to recall. I can recall the chronological events so clearly in my mind, and the feelings, the visuals, etc. I always got weird orange and purple hues on 4-ACO DMT. I know it's different for everyone, but that's how it was for me. And then the second time I took it was 90 milligrams, but I overdosed. I thought I was taking 60 milligrams. Didn't overdose like OD in the traditional sense of taking a drug, but I overdosed myself. I was supposed to dose myself at 60 milligrams. I thought these, I thought actually no, I was supposed to take 30 milligrams, but I ended up taking 90. I thought the chocolates had 10 milligrams in each, so there's 3 chocolates. And it turns out, I asked him, I was like, how much 4-ACO DMT is in each of these, by the way? Because I just assumed it was 10 milligrams. He hadn't got back to me all day. And then, of course, coincidentally, as soon as I'd taken them, after about 30 minutes, he replied saying, yeah, bro, there was like 30 milligrams in each of them. I was like, how many did you take? I was like, I took 3. And he was like, Jesus. And then my trip ensued. You can check it out. I'll put it again in the description. I talk about it a lot because it was the only time I ever had a true out-of-body experience, a complete and total ego death and beyond. I'd had ego deaths beforehand on LSD, but this was another level. It wasn't even ego death, it was beyond that. It makes ego death feel like child's play. There wasn't even, the ego couldn't even comprehend its own death. It was just, you know how the ego will cling on in many ego death experiences, like no, it'll imbue your mind with fear, like nah, this isn't right, you don't actually want this, because it's doing its best to tether itself to reality. It was like there was so much consciousness at play that it just instantly absorbed the ego. There was no chance for it to hold on. It was like instant death. It was like dying. It's like ego death from a low dose, like a common dose of LSD, and it's like, this is quite gruesome, but it's like dying of your injuries, whereas an ego death on a high dose of a psychedelic, like 90 milligrams of 4-ACO DMT, feels like literally just dying instantly, like a gunshot to the head. That's what it felt like. There was no way, you couldn't even comprehend the fear, the pain. It was just, you were just gone. And so then I became like this weird vortex galaxy, and there was another entity. It was like this woman, this purple woman. I remember more and more about it every year, you know, and she was just basically feeding back insights that I'd already had in my heightened state that my ego liked to misconstrue, like the oneness of reality, the universal love that ties everything together, that everything ultimately will be all right, and that anything bad is anything that I interpret as bad in my egoic state is just a projection, and it's a bias that I've constructed, and everything is ultimately good in the higher sense, capital G good, ultimate goodness, absolute goodness, and that there's so much more to life than this material reality. This is just literally the tip of the iceberg. There's beings beyond us. It's sort of how we look at an ant, like, oh, look at this really intelligent little creature that just walks, like scuttles around and picks up leaves. Oh, it's so intelligent, but yet so simple. Well, there's literally aliens and entities and beings looking at us right now, looking at me right now, I guess, thinking, oh, look at this really clever creature, this biological being, and he's creating all this stuff, and the other ones have been making buildings. Oh, so intelligent yet so simple. And yet there's aliens, then there's gods, and then there's demigods and all this stuff, and however you want to phrase it, oh god, it goes on forever. The rabbit hole goes on forever. You can zoom into reality infinitely. You can zoom out of reality infinitely. Many of you might not have ever experienced this directly via your own consciousness, and you might just know it theoretically, which, kudos to you. You've transcended the materialist paradigm and the dogma of science that propagates the West and says, no, if we can't prove it, if we can't tangibly touch it, empirically prove it, it can't be real, holy fuck. Life's way more complicated than material things. Wait until you realize this whole room in front of you is being spun up by a consciousness, and you're imagining a material reality to ground yourself in the dream of life. And it's actually the most beautiful revelation of all time, and that 90mg 4-ACO DMT trip definitely gave me it. But let me just say again, I would not advocate taking a dose as high as mine or as high as this guy's at all. But fair play to this guy. Obviously, he didn't mean to take 200mg. Please do not do this, because the chances of getting PTSD, or even like, I mean, let's get on a level here. This guy towards the end of the trip was so perplexed and delirious that he even considered self-termination. This stuff gets very serious when you veer into these high doses. Like I say, your ego thinks you're ready. In reality, oftentimes it's not. It likes to convince itself it is, and then it gets like this weird sort of hedonic pleasure of pursuing heightened states, and all the states saying, oh yeah, I can handle it at all times. It's like a challenge for itself. But then some challenges get so challenging, it's actually a state of life or death situation. So yeah, right. Just be careful, be mindful, be wise, and stay safe. And I'll see you on the other side.